So, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Welcome again to this ocean powerhouse. And again, thanks to Woods Hole and everybody who's putting together this pavilion, third year in a row. This is really the place to be. It's a fantastic energy here for the last few days, and it's really continuing this extremely important discussion. Today, we're going to talk about how to unlock private capital. It's a joint meeting between the UN Global Compact and the high-level panel for a sustainable blue economy. And this is critical. I think we heard out for the last few days here how little commitment there is from the private finance to climate solutions and climate investments. And we really have to mobilize that big trillion-dollar bucket to move in the right direction. There have been some good news, and I think with the GHG strategy at IMO earlier this year, we now have a global industry that have to decarbonize. There will be no license to operate a ship without abiding to the GHG emission strategy of the IMO. That's great news. And shipping companies like CMA, Suzanne, we'll hear more from them later, they're already investing. So how can we scale up these investments? How can we make them just transition? How can we make it addressing biodiversity and good governance? So let's see what we can do today from a fantastic panel. But before that, I will like to introduce my two first speakers, and we're going to start with you, Sanda Ojiambo, Assistant Secretary General of the UN and CEO of the UN Global Compact. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you to all of you for joining us for this really important conversation here at COP. You know, we're talking about COP, and the question about are we going to COP in or COP out? I know it's a colloquialism, but this is really about leaning in very strongly with what is needed to move us forward. And Erica set the scene around license to operate, around the importance for mobilizing financing for what we need to do. But let me reflect a little bit on oceans and why we're here, obviously. Oceans, so critical to addressing so many of the challenges and transitions that we need to face and undertake. The climate transitions, addressing food and food sustainability, addressing energy, and many other areas. As we saw at last year's UN conference in Lisbon, global leaders are increasingly recognizing that the ocean is key to rescuing the 2030 agenda and indeed advancing all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Since Lisbon, we know that 83 countries have signed the legally binding High Seas Treaty, forging a common wave of conservation and sustainability in the high seas. From our perspective at UN Global Compact, the business community is also increasingly recognizing the value of a blue economy, where indeed investing in a sustainable ocean and ocean resources leads to economic growth, leads to jobs and healthy ecosystems. And at the same time, the ocean economy is growing, projected to create a gross value add of about $3 trillion by the year 2030. But in spite of this enormous potential, the threats continue actually unabated. Pollution, overuse, and rapidly rising temperatures are increasing by the day. Toxic chemicals, millions of tons of plastic flooding into coastal ecosystems. And in recent months, as we've all seen this, no matter where you are in the world, record temperatures have plagued us, but also ocean temperatures have reached record highs. So the ocean is not spared. But in spite of this urgency, and I think why this coalition and the work that we do is so important, is that SDG 14, Life Below Water, has received the lowest level of financial investment of any sustainable development goal. I've been in the job for 3 years, and I've said this every year for 3 years, and it really is time to see how we can move the needle forward. Financing is so critical for the important work that we need to do. So the Ocean Stewardship Coalition of the UN Global Compact brings together companies committed to these goals, scaling sustainable ocean business and taking climate action. Also very clear that we need multi-stakeholder partnerships to get us where we need to go. Let me talk a little bit about the Ocean Investment Protocol that we are launching to guide investors, corporations, governments, and development finance institutions to drive and deliver and derive benefit from the ocean blue economy. Another important tool to highlight is the protocol and the Global Practitioner's Guide for Bonds to Finance a Sustainable Blue Economy. The Oceans team is here. They can provide you with more reference and more information to be able to do this. truly no time to waste. The UN Secretary General reminds us that the ocean is life and ocean is livelihoods. So there's lots that we need to do. I will stop my comments because not only do I want to hear from the distinguished ambassador, but certainly from the panelists as well. Thank you so very much for your time.
So please welcome Your Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Palau to the UN, Ilana, Seid. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to the UN Global Compact, the Ocean Stewardship Coalition, and our team at the Ocean Panel for convening us today. I'm really honored to be here because I serve as the Sherpa co-chair for the Ocean Panel. For those of you who don't know it, we are currently at 18 countries that control almost 50% of the territorial oceans of the world. Our mandate is really to create a sustainable blue economy, and that's through effective protection, sustainable production, and equitable prosperity. And so none of that can happen without unlocking blue finance to actually get us to our goals. I'm also honored to be the co-chair for the steering committee with Pascal Lamy from France for a very special event on the sidelines, on the margins of UNOC in Nice, titled Blue Economy and Finance Forum, and that really is our mandate. So how can we use the COP and on our way to UNOC work together to unlock hopefully very large amounts of blue finance so that we can really accelerate our transition to a sustainable blue economy. As we all know, and my speaker before me said it, SDG 14 is the most underfunded of the SDGs. That's probably for a variety of reasons, which I'll touch on very briefly. I think one, ocean governance has largely been fragmented. The adoption of BB&J earlier this year is a huge step towards getting that system right so that we can increase investment. Because even if you're effectively protecting your own territorial waters, if the high seas is a free-for-all, it kind of makes a challenging investment case. So the ratification of the BB&J instrument is really key to trying to unlock large amounts of finance. So if you know countries that have not signed up or ratified BB&J, we should really push them to get to the 60 ratifications for entry into force. We also don't really have very solid blue accounting frameworks. And I know there are countries like the United States that are heavily working on creating these things. And those are important. So we can all speak a common language. We can measure our output and then be able to effectively manage those. So those are kind of the underlying things that we need to do for investors to become a little bit more comfortable in putting large amounts of capital into this space. And then switching on to how do we activate the private finance sector? And I think multilateral organizations, GCF, the GEF, the MDBs, the Asian Development Banks, for example, they need to kind of come in as the first money in guarantees. So if we work with them with philanthropic dollars, they can really de-risk ocean investments, and we need them to come in at a high level and with a lot of money so that we can then activate the private sector. I saw Marcus from Deutsche Bank earlier. There he is. And I really am keen to work with the public finance sectors, with philanthropy, and with the private sector, and we have to put our heads together and figure out how we unlock ocean finance. And I think the insurance sector is key, as well as other players in the private finance system. It's a big job, but I think we can do it. And I think we have kind of UNOC as our deadline. So we really got to work very quickly to get there. The third thing I'll touch on is innovative finance. And we also spoke a little bit about blue bonds, but you know, the world has changed, and there's a lot of different financial instruments out there, and there hasn't been very much innovation in the ocean space. So relying both on the private sector as well as technology. I think the technology sector has a lot of very innovative ideas that maybe we can rely on. So blue bonds, debt to nature swaps, biodiversity credits are just some of the examples that people have thrown out there. But how can we use those as kind of new innovative ways to generate money for conservation, for sustainable fisheries, for sustainable aquaculture, so that we can solve both blue economy challenges, but also have co-benefits, including biodiversity and climate effects. So I will end with that, and I look forward to working with everybody on our way to UNOC. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And to unlock this finance, we need a key, and this is our key panel. And to moderate this panel, we have Suzanne Johnson from the Lloyd's Register Foundation, seconded to the UN Global Compact, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Eric. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much. Yes, as Eric said, that the focus of this today is on unlocking private capital towards a more sustainable ocean economy. And thank you so much to Assistant Secretary General Ojiambo and to Ambassador Seid for your remarks about funding the ocean economy. I mean, just to add to some of your reflections in terms of what are some of the blockers, why we aren't getting the capital to where it needs to go. There's part of it is that a lot of the ocean economy is in small, medium enterprises, or the investments that are out there don't meet the needs of the large investors. So if you think about it, assets under management for the 100 largest sovereign wealth funds are something like $25 trillion. And we need to harness that. We need to harness private capital. But at the moment, most of the investments don't have the size, the risk, or the liquidity that those type of investors need. So we have a very distinguished panel today, and many of you on the panel are working with the Global Compact as well as the high-level panel on something that we're calling the Ocean Investment Protocol. And this is a series of recommendations for action as well as a way to call attention to important initiatives that are out there to unblock capital. Let me turn, because I would like very much to listen to our panel and your suggestions about what can be done from the perspectives of governments, MDBs, ocean industry, and investors to get that capital flow going. So I first would turn to Dan Hubble, and you're a senior advisor for ocean policy with the U.S. State Department. You're also the Sushubra for the high-level panel on the sustainable ocean economy. And Dan, thanks for your work on the Ocean Investment Protocol. Thanks for your work on ocean policy. But as you think about on the run-up to the Ocean Conference, and you've said before that governments need to create an inviting, friendly environment to bring in to capital investors and for industry. What are some of the main things that need to happen in the next couple of years from the U.S. perspective?
It is on. Thanks very much for the question, Suzanne. And maybe to start with a theme that was touched on in the opening remarks, let's pick on shipping a little bit. And I shouldn't put it in that context as much as I think I should highlight and emphasize the progress and phenomenal opportunity that we see coming down the pipe for the green shipping industry. And really in that context, we have to start with that word, green. And that means the transition to near zero and zero emission fuels on a rapid basis, scaling up to at least 5% of the industry by volume by 2030, and then to basically total net zero decarbonization by or close to 2050, in line with the IMO's new 2023 GHG strategy. In that regard, it's great to share this panel with CMA CGM, as it was great to share the work together we had on the Green Shipping Challenge's second event on December 1st. So in the context of what a government is going to do to unlock that opportunity, we really come back to the fuels question, which is that if a shipper does choose to install green hydrogen or green methanol as their primary source of fuel, it's going to be a pretty abrupt and one-way journey if they get to the other end of the port and there's no matching fuel to meet them there. So the scaling process really starts with what we call green shipping corridors, which is either a point-to-point or point out from the port and back, or a multi-port system of corridor routes where these fuels can be found, where these technologies can be tested reliably, and where we can learn the lessons we need to learn this decade. And for the United States, in our case, one of the promising investments we're making in our ports right now is a $7 billion investment into 7 different hydrogen hubs located across the United States. The one in Appalachia Probably not so much a maritime use, but for California, for the Pacific Northwest, for the East Coast of the United States, for the Gulf Coast, all of these are strong use cases with key maritime components. And that's a $7 billion starting investment from the United States for projects that we have selected for further negotiation. But beyond just that $7 billion investment, what that unlocks, in our estimate, is another $40 billion in private capital. And that's the piece of the puzzle that I think we would see as extremely promising. This is not just about our down payment as a government, it is about thoroughly de-risking and providing that initial marker on the table and being met by private sector every step of the way. To further supplement that point, we have another $1 billion in demand-side support to offer a bit of an inducement and a structure for companies to make that first mover jump, as many shipping companies are starting to do. I think it's also worth noting that we can provide resources and share these materials. As we learn lessons beyond just being an inviting space to collaborate and work with other leaders and first movers across our own country, we can share the resources and lessons learned to the rest of the world. I talked a little bit about the Green Shipping Challenge just a minute ago. And at COP27, when we launched that challenge, we provided 2 products that I think are key to that sort of next phase of expansion. And the first is by our Department of Energy. It's simply a library of resources connected to green shipping corridors, green fuels, green ships. It's been pretty well trafficked in the past year. We keep it relatively up to date. It's a detailed resource where you can find both academic studies, gray literature, and other materials down to engineering work to help you along your journey as you try and think about this process. Because green shipping is only going to work if it rolls out on a global basis as rapidly as possible. And then the second piece to further facilitate that is the Green Shipping Corridors Initiation Project, which is another program run through our national lab, and I'm pleased to say now supported by the Maersk McKinney Moller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping and by Denmark, to provide pre-feasibility studies on green shipping corridors in developing countries. This is a partnership program that we have launched with Panama, Fiji, and the other countries of the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership, and which we plan to extend further in the coming years. These build the necessary consortia of private investors and actors who will then actually turn that from paper to reality. And every step of the way, government can work with them to line up the necessary incentives, create the necessary structure, and build the right foundation. And obviously, that's just one piece. I'm happy to go back to other pieces on the blue economy, but maybe I'll just stop it there for now.
No, great, thanks. Well, particularly around the maritime, you really, you talked about the partnerships. From government to finance to scaling up industry. So, and catalytic. So thank you. Let's turn now to a view from multilateral development banks. And in a way, Mr. James Scriven, you're the CEO of IDB Invest, which is the private sector arm of Inter-American Development Bank. But you have had a blue strategy for quite some time now. And, your region is Latin America and the Caribbean. But I think what you're doing is you're taking large investor funds out there and bringing them to your region, and you're matching it with investments there, which are sometimes subscale. Tell us about your lessons, what you're doing there around the blue economy and growing it in that region. I would imagine that some of it echoes what Dan was saying, but you have your own spin on it. So please tell us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure being something surrounded by blue, in all honesty. So I run the private sector arm of the IDB group, and I think it's important to start by saying that our president announced yesterday they'll be tripling our climate investments to $150 million. And why is this important is because of what climate represents for Latin America and the Caribbean, both as a challenge. We do face 7 of the 10 most vulnerable countries in the world of climate are in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we house the lung of the world, that is the Amazon. And with that, part of this significant scaling up of investment in climate is a big component of blue. We have had a blue strategy, as you alluded to. We have been extremely invested in a number of countries to do what is called a debt for climate swaps. Very active in Barbados and Ecuador in particular. Part of the proceeds were to protect the Galapagos surrounding waters. That's been a good example of some of the work we're doing. But I wanted to point out your concept of how to crowd in institutional investors in a sector or in a theme that is not well known. One of the successes that we've seen in other colors of the UN Sustainable Development Goals has been the creation of thematic bonds. Thematic bonds is a business that is approaching the $1 trillion in the world, and it's when you relate investors to a specific sector. We've issued 37 thematic bonds for clients in our region. That we're doing it in the number of $3 billion. Some of those are blue bonds now. Knowing that most of the countries in Latin America, Caribbean are surrounded by oceans, and I think it's a third of the fresh water in the world is in the Amazon basin. So all our strategy is around, one, preparing these projects. These are very difficult projects to engage with, so a lot of the work that we do is in project preparation. Second, there's a lot of KPIs related to how to protect the ocean and how to make it more sustainable. If you look at the tourism business, if you look at a number of areas that are surrounding it. And last but not least, what we do is use our own capital, and you alerted to de-risk these projects. There's a lot of unknown things or lack of knowledge of understanding of how the ocean interacts with the population. And what we are doing as a development institution is take the risk of that unknown. So provided guarantees of first losses for these investors to get to understand this and be able to come in. So I'll stop here, but that's a bit of the role that we're playing. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the de-risking is very important, but so is the capacity transfer and teaching the learnings. And thanks for your leadership too on the debt for nature swaps as well. But you enable very much industry. So this is an opportunity to turn to the industry side of this panel. And we have Olivia Breese here, and you are CEO for Europe and also Power to X for Ørsted, which is the world's largest offshore renewable company. Interestingly, so James talked about blue bonds as one such tool for financing the blue economy. And this summer, Ørsted issued the first ever offshore renewable blue bond, which was a successful delivery of issuance. Wondered if you could share with us some of the reasons why you as a company issued a blue bond, and maybe what are some of your learnings for other potential issuers?
Certainly happy to do so. So before I get on to the learnings, which I think is what everybody probably wants to hear about, I think there are really three reasons to the first part of your question why we issued a blue bond. And the first is that as the world's largest developer, owner and operator of offshore wind farms, the ocean for us is a partner, and the health of the ocean is absolutely critical to the ongoing sustainable operation of our business. The second thing is that we are now developing green shipping fuels. We're developing the largest e-methanol plant. In fact, we're executing, slightly frighteningly, the largest green methanol plant in Europe at present in northern Sweden. So we're also extremely committed to supporting shipping companies to defossilize their operations. And then finally, a key part of our growth over the last 15 years has been exactly tapping into those thematic bonds that you mentioned. And we were one of the first companies to issue a green bond. We were certainly the first to issue an asset-backed green bond. And then, as you say, earlier this year, we issued a blue bond. And the reason for that is because as an experienced bond issuer, we felt it was really important to go first. Because if you go first and you fail, it's awkward and embarrassing, and we are maybe better placed to carry that awkwardness and embarrassment than smaller issuers. But actually, it was a big success. It was oversubscribed. It wasn't, I'm about to say it wasn't huge, but actually in the context of some of these numbers, it was quite large. It was 100 million euro. And it has given us significant learnings. And so what I'd really like to do is share some of those learnings with you so that when you go back into wider society and talk to people about the issuance of blue bonds and how attractive they actually are as a way of crowding in private sector investment, you've actually got maybe some of these learnings to hand, because that was an important point for us of doing it in the first place. Obviously, the first point was to kickstart momentum for addressing that major gap in finance, and I've talked about that, and also to demonstrate to the financial community that there are true opportunities and demand to invest in those initiatives. One of the things that was very important to us in terms of credibility with the financial industry was to prove that we were really ring-fencing the proceeds of those bonds so that we could literally, I mean, money is fungible, but so that we could point to the proceeds from the blue bonds, and they are going directly to our biodiversity initiatives in the ocean, and they are also going directly to our green shipping projects. So it's not going into the wider corporate slush fund, it's very specifically going to support the ocean. And that's something that's resonated very strongly with investors. The third thing is it's been a great opportunity to really test investors and engage with them on the measurement framework. We haven't talked much about the measurement framework, but actually, in my experience of working with the investor community, the more tangibly you can tell them what it is that they're buying, the more likely they are to buy it. And so being able to measure extremely explicitly what it is that they're buying, that is going to be a very, very important thing. And it can't be, I mean, corporates can measure, but you have to have a public sector body, a public sector certification scheme that people can measure themselves against, because otherwise things can be a little bit open to interpretation, and that's not good. And then finally, collaboration. You know, panels like this, groups like this, they're so important, because the only way that we will be able to crowd in the finance that we need for this sector is frankly for everyone to step out of their established roles. I provide equity, I provide debt, I'm a corporate. Everybody needs to come together. Everybody needs to really think about the problems and how the capital that they have at hand is able to address those problems in the most cost-efficient way. And there are lots of different ways to play down the capital stack. And one of the things that I really hope that we can do with the blue financing is encourage people to step out of their historic roles and into some more collaborative solutions for bringing the considerable level of finance that we need to really address these issues.
Thank you very much. But you did talk about the metrics, which is interesting because investors need to demonstrate impact, and it's, without clear metrics, it's hard to do. So it's a really important point to bring up. Thank you. Yes, and now may I go on to Claire Martin, and you're the head of sustainability, the VP for one of the giants in container shipping and logistics, and you've made some very some big announcements so far in the past couple days, and wondered if you could talk about, in terms of as you look at shipping and ports and logistics, how are you matching, larger funds to those projects, and what are you seeing as opportunities more broadly to scale up the pipeline for those type of investments?
Thank you for the introduction. It is true to say that at CMA CGM, we act for a couple of years already. We act in a step-by-step. So 2.5 years ago, we committed to be net zero by 2050. And last Friday, there was a second announcement with 2 key milestones saying where we're going to be in 2030 and in 2040, because we really have to explain how we're going to go down to 2050 net zero. So, and with those 2 milestones, we will be at the highest level expected or regulated by IMO, by the way. And second, we also said we won't do this alone. We have to cooperate, even with our best competitors. That's what also a kind of unlock situation. But to do this, we need massive amount of money. So what we've been doing the last 2 years, we have invested already $15 billion on our fleet of vessels. Why? So we are already starting to reorient finance. We don't finance anymore conventional vessels. We only are investing now in the new technologies with LNG vessels propelled and methanol vessel propelled. And this is the way to modernize our assets, but we not only do this, we have also to retrofit the existing fleet, because our fleet of vessel has a life cycle of 25 to 30 years. So we have also to play on the two legs, the renewed fleet, but also the ongoing one. The second type of financing is something that we launched last September 2022. We launched our own corporate investment fund, which is now called Pulse, which is a 1.5 billion euros fund, which is a way to launch a kind of signal to partners, because this fund is here to accelerate, again, this decarbonation, dedicated to decarbonation and to acceleration on the energy transition, so looking for new solutions of energies, raising hands towards startups, innovative startups that are able to propose the next generation of solutions. So it is a way to say it is a special vehicle looking for two types of impact. I like your return on ocean investment. We are looking on return on financial, ROI, okay, on one hand, but we are also, with the same level of demand and of commitment, looking for return on and impact for the ocean, for the decarbonation, but also for all the biodiversity projects. So I like this ROI that you propose. And let me give you two examples of solutions that we have founded thanks to this fund, Pulse Fund. For instance, we started to work and to support financially a scientist, entrepreneur, and sailor who launched Energy Observer. It is a small boat which was sailing around the world to test the different renewable options of energy on a boat, and namely green hydrogen. So they did it for 2 years. We started to support them, and then with Pulse Fund, we are now funding the startups that they are launching, EODev, so Energy Observer Dev, where we're going to scale, because this is also the reason why we launched this fund, to scale the small solutions and go to larger one. But this is again on, energy, because we absolutely need the energy sector to come together with us. And this is why the day before yesterday, when we had all the shipping players around Mr. Kerry and other head of governments, we had also Engie, the French giant in energy, which was also explaining the type of solutions that they are preparing for us, and we are co-investing with them. We are de-risking their own investment, again, thanks to this Pulse Fund. And my other example is, I don't know if you have heard about Sea Orbiter, which is a seagoing international and collaborative platform that is under building. We have funded the building of this platform, and it is a totally innovative. It's like the kind of international space. Exactly. It will go down the ocean and study the minus 30 meter below the sea. So totally innovative, and this is a kind of project that we have also funded. And my third point was again the same than yours, by the way. Collaboration is absolutely key, but with all the types of partners. Can be the energy sector, and probably we should do things together with Ørsted, but also with other again, startups or partners which are ready to co-invest with us, or even with, as I said earlier, with our competitors, because joining forces with, as I said 2 days ago, there is no frontier when it comes to fight climate change and protect the ocean. And a last word, among our workforce, we have seafarers. And seafarers are so passionate, so fascinated by the ocean. They cannot do the job without respecting the area where they are spending their life. So this is an ultimate reason for which we have to invest in this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It's interesting to hear you, but also everybody on this panel so far, lay out a very intentional roadmap, you from SEMA, CGM, but thinking very much both near term, smaller scale up, and longer term steps. Thank you. Let me talk to Poppy Allonby now, and you are at T. Rowe Price and head of ESG, but you have a long history. You were at BlackRock for decades, and you now are thinking very much about giving investors an opportunity in the blue markets. Tell us some of the thinking that you're doing around creating options for investment in the ocean.
Absolutely. I think that's working. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I think what you're alluding to, Suzanne, is that last week we announced a partnership with the IFC to build what we think is the world's first blue bond fund. So we've heard from some of the other panelists and some of the opening remarks about the importance of blue bonds potentially as a solution for bridging this funding gap. And we agree. I would agree with your comment, many of the comments before that were made before, and that we also see that as a huge opportunity, and one that can do two things. The first is provide investors with returns, and I think that is important because if investors have a positive experience, that will crowd in more funding, and if it can be done repeatably, it becomes self-perpetuating. And then, of course, the other thing that is so important here is creating better outcomes for the ocean. And so having the KPIs and the like that others have mentioned is going to be critical. So we're quite excited about this potential development. I want to just say a word on some of the partnership we have and the importance of partnership between the public and private sector when we think about crowding in finance to the blue economy. We have seen in the past these partnerships between private and public organizations be incredibly helpful in terms of initially scaling up and driving demand for kind of innovative new financial asset classes. So some of the other panelists have talked about green bonds, and I'd say this is also an example where early on creating public-private partnerships helped stimulate that market. And so the IFC was critical in that, and they formed similar partnerships to what we're talking about with blue bonds in the green bond space. And as others have remarked, that's gone from basically no market 10 years ago to now over $1 trillion. So, you know, if we're able to achieve anything anywhere like that and replicate that in the blue bond space, that would be very, very good indeed. But I hope that at least what we're doing is a strong signal to the market from a large US asset manager and the IFC that there is a commitment and a need to accelerate development of capital and allocation of capital into this area.
Thank you. It's exciting. When can people start investing?
My lawyers will drag me out if I mention anything about investing on a panel like this. Thank you, though.
No, anyway, congratulations on that and for thinking and leading the way on that. Let me turn now to Indonesia and Dr. Rita Wirakusama, who is the CEO of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Indonesia. And, Indonesia is part of the high-level panel on the sustainable ocean economy. Very much you look at the energy transition, ports, fishing, all kinds of industry within the ocean space. Tell us about how you how you think of sustainable investing and what might help you to think about investing specifically in the blue space.
I came from a country as big as the United States, except 75% of our area are water. So I could not emphasize enough how much I love you guys. I wish I could hug every single one of you because you talk all about ocean, which is a big part of us as a country. And let me just throw you some statistics. I was going to mention to you that we have 17,365 islands, and I took a peek on the Wikipedia just a few minutes ago. Apparently we have 18,110 islands now. So somehow it has grown despite the global warming. 6,000 of them are inhabited. The ocean, you're talking about blue ocean, blue economy. The ocean has given us about 7 million jobs as part of our economy. The tourism, the sea tourism, is about $65 billion. So it's an extremely important part of Indonesia. One of the downsides about having such a huge area of water is sometimes it's extremely hard for us to guard our territory. So the overfishing, many of them actually came from boats and ships that are extremely modern that we don't even have capabilities to guard is one of the problems. Having many container ships coming in, most of them, if not all of them, are still on the fossil fuels, obviously creates a lot of pollutions. So these are all things that we all have to face as a country, as the largest archipelago in the nation, in the world, in fact. INA, Indonesia Investment Authority, started about 685 working days ago, so we're pretty new. We have invested about $3.5 billion so far. About 20+% are in the areas of climate change, energy transition, and renewable energy. We focus a lot more on green economy, but we just realized that as I read through about blue economy, we have invested in blue economy. We partner with one of the largest port operators to modernize one of the ports in Indonesia. We also are working with one of the leading companies in the world on nature-based solutions. So we will actually be doing some replanting on mangrove, on some of the corals and stuff like that. So without us realizing, we have 4 focus areas of investments. 1 is infrastructure, 2 is digital, 3 is healthcare, and 4th is green and renewable energy. I might as well add blue on my 4th one because that's what we have been doing without us focusing too much of it. So we are, just like many other panels, we are developing our strategy through partnership. We call it partnership, the same thing with collaborations. We have been co-investing with asset managers, with sovereign wealth funds, with pension funds across the world. That's how we actually been able to grow the $3.5 billion investment in the last 2.5 years. So we're very, very happy to be able to work with you. And maybe for the last time I wanted to say this, we focus a lot on money part, the funding side. Money is fungible, and there seems to be a lot more interest on going into either green or blue. But it is as important to actually create an investable assets, because a lot of times we think a lot about the financing, and yet the assets or the target are not as readily available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess it goes back to building this pipeline that large investors can use and engage with. I think we have time for a couple of more questions before we start to wrap up. But I wanted to go back to the U.S. and thinking about, innovation and technology were mentioned as building blocks for creating the markets and investments. And from your perspective, from the U.S. or from the Ocean Panel, what should we be doing? And in particular, you think about countries that, around the world, maybe in the EMs, that, not only do they need maybe development assistance, even more than that, they need access to technologies that they can use to build up their own market. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on supporting innovation technologies and creating an environment.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really key question. And I think starting with some of the rollout pieces that I touched on, and I think it's just worth embroidering more on how we share our lessons and how we build out the lessons learned. And so maybe to shift to a different theme, and offshore wind comes to mind on this one. And so I know for Ørsted, I really don't mean to speak on behalf of this, but just to say that one of our key programs is within the Department of Energy's, and I have to make sure I've got this name right. They're with the, it is on the wrong side of the paper, excuse me. It's within our wind assistance office, we have recently allocated $27.4 million for 15 separate projects, which were all designed to target particular challenges associated with wind development, both on and offshore. The one that comes to my mind immediately is transmission loss over long distance. And when we talk about fostering an environment, the work that we do in the United States on that front is then something that we can disseminate around the world and continue to foster that partnership with companies like Ørsted and others. Another piece to that is back to the resource sharing and creation of sort of libraries of knowledge, like the DOE's library or Green Shipping Library that I brought up earlier. And I think one of the other pieces that's really key is, again, just back to the theme of collaboration and partnership. And so it's so great that all of you are here. But IDB, we have made a $10 billion donation to the work on nature-based solutions through the grant facility. And to talk of that kind of development, that's targeting 40% of the world's biodiversity, the lung of the world, and many of the other assets, both on and offshore, that are so valuable to closing the $700 billion gap in biodiversity funding and unlocking the kind of private capital that would be needed to be seen in these regions. And maybe to note just one other piece of that development and collaboration within the Green Shipping Challenge, and IDB is actually associated with this project as well. A Green Shipping Corridor project for the Caribbean was recently created. And this is, I think, a tremendously promising example of how we share information is going to be so key. Players like Maersk are involved in that project, and what they learn from one element of our space, or how the Department of State interacts with other corridors, is then fed into that piece to accelerate the development across that region. In a place where assets or ports may not be as mature as they are in, say, New York or Los Angeles, we can then apply the lessons learned, build in new efficiencies, and maybe skip a step or two while also providing the necessary funding and capital from both public and private sources to unlock that.
Thank you. Really interesting. Thank you. And well, let me continue on that vein to James Scriven. And, you've been so instrumental, thank you, for helping out with the Ocean Investment Protocol and creating this roadmap for investment. But Dan's talking about, collaboration, reaching across to various stakeholders. But if you take a look at one of your countries, Barbados, and just one of your countries, could the Ocean Investment Protocol, is there a need, could a country use this type of roadmap to create a clearer pathway towards bringing in investment?
The answer is yes. I just came from a panel, I was in the audience, where you had, among others, Prime Minister Motley. There's been a strong voice for integrating everything that is done. They call it From Roof to Reefs as part of the Bridgetown Initiative. So yes, the answer is yes. We're trying to do it across all our Caribbean countries, together with the association, both with IFC, the Caribbean Development Bank, and what is called CAF, and us, to be able to invest across the Caribbean in life. All our investments, if you look at it, we've got a very strong focus on the Caribbean. 10% of our business is actually going to the Caribbean, and most of it relates to the ocean in some form or fashion, of which tourism is a big part of it. So the answer is yes, but Barbados is one, but not only Barbados, I would say.
Great, thank you. We can create some case studies for sure. I think our time is starting to wrap up. Maybe I could just throw a general question to the panel, which goes back a little bit on measuring return for investment and a return on investment. But you know, there's so many initiatives right now and standards and frameworks in the market that it becomes diffuse and dampens deal flow due to the lack of clarity. But you know, are there any thoughts on maybe some of the ultimate authorities or that would trigger integrity or standards to look to, or ways to create a metric, or ways to create frameworks that we buy into and that are clear? You can take it from lots of different perspectives here, this question. Yeah, okay. Olivia.
Can I have a go?
Please.
So I can see that we could collectively get very tied up in answering this. But I can also see that it is best, as my grandmother always says, you cannot let the best be the enemy of the good, which basically means take a step, then take the next step, then take the next step. And that is actually very much faster than standing and waiting for the perfect final solution. And so to pick up your point, Dan, one of the things that I think governments can do immediately, tangibly, and with really no cost to themselves would be to require those who use the ocean, who use their ocean, people like us, to make their investments be net positive on biodiversity. So every piece of steel we put into the ocean that we commission by 2030 will be net positive on diversity. That's not a requirement. That's something that we do because it's critically important to the world, but also to our business. There is nothing stopping any government, but the US is particularly well placed to do so because they have excellent offshore wind resources, from doing that and from explaining what they need, being very explicit to the private sector what they require, and tying it to their license to operate. And as soon as one country does that, everybody will do it.
Thank you. Claire.
So your question, I would say, first of all, there are things which are pretty easy. To measure your CO2 emission reduction, this is something that is already pretty clear, standardized, at least in our sector, because it's a question of consumption and of type of fuel or gas or whatsoever, or energy you use, and then you have a conversion factor. It's pretty easy. And this is one of the KPI that we use in front of the ROI, the financial ROI, for every single investment. Now, it's not always easy to plan 2, 5, or 10 years down the road, how it will evolve. So, but this is pretty clear. There is something which is less clear and where we probably collectively should work is, what about the biodiversity footprint, the equivalent of the CO2 footprint, but for biodiversity in the marine environment? Because for soils, there are some methods which are already existing and are standardized more or less. But for the oceans, these 3 dimensions, so few things or almost nothing is existing. So it's very difficult to really measure, because there are many ways we do. We can measure the number of fish that are coming back when we put certain systems in the sea, or where we avoid pollutions, etc. But there is no standard, and on this we should work together with the scientists and also the government on this.
Thank you. And Poppy, do you want to add something?
just add one of the ways we're thinking about it from an investment perspective. So when we think particularly about the investments that we have, one of the things that we're doing with this announcement that we made last week is we've developed with the IFC a blue impact bond framework to really look at making sure we've got a lot of integrity in what we're investing in. And I think the important thing for us is to make sure we're transparent and robust so that we can deliver, as I said before, it's important in this whole space that one delivers the returns and the impact outcomes. So that's one area that we are collaborating on.
Thank you very much. Our time is wrapping it up. Yep, I see the sign. But could I just, maybe it's a nice note to end on, calling attention to the UN Ocean Conference in France. And in terms of metrics that we've talked about, and coming up with ocean metrics, we have France and Ashok Adhikam, who is one of the leaders in developing the UN Ocean Conference, and you're thinking quite heavily about coming up with an ocean metric. One last word on that before we wrap up. No, it's a surprise. It's a surprise.
Excellencies, no, we're working on, I would say, 3 work streams and at least 3 metrics. I'll say it again. The UN Ocean Conference is hosted by France and Costa Rica. We're working with all the UN agencies, of course, mobilizing them and being inspired by them and trying to converge. And the best way to converge is to find, as you were saying, common metrics. So one is science, and I'm going to be very short because there's going to be a presentation of one of the UN Ocean UNOC special events, which is called the One Ocean Science Congress, which will take place 3 days before UNOC opens on Monday 9th of June at 9 o'clock, 2025. Till then, we have 18 months to work on these 3 work streams and 3 priorities. So one is science, the other one is blue economy and finance, and that's going to take place on the 7th and 8th of June in Monaco. It's co-chaired by Pascal Lamy and Ilana, Ambassador Ilana Seid. We are so proud to have UN Global Compact part of our, and thank you very much, part of our working groups to be inspired by all the work that we've been doing to mobilize the private sector. But we're also going to mobilize the public sector, including us, to come up with new financial and innovative solutions, scale up blue economy projects, having the partnership of major companies and major countries, we hope, in this, and see if we can mobilize the community, I would say, around ocean finance mapping, at least. And let's see in that work stream if we come up with a new facility. And that's blue economy. And the third one is sea level rise, because we want to be concrete. We are mobilizing a network of cities, coastal regions, and insular governments and states to come up not only with a manifesto, but come up with solutions, and again with science and finance at the heart of all what we're going to do. And we can't do it without you all. And we're so happy to be at this Ocean Pavilion, and thank you for having us, and congratulations to all the panelists.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you.